Okay, so you have joined the LCOY South Africa webinar, and we are planning on giving you some context about what LCOY is, what LCOY South Africa is, and the outcome of this particular webinar is to rather co-create a set of principles of urban youth engagement in climate policy.
So I will be your moderator for today. My name is Mujema Kantiri, and I am the contact point for LCOY South Africa. Today we'll be having the first component of our LCOY, and I won't say too much because the rest of the program is supposed to speak to that. So I'm going to hand over to Kalala from the Global Shapers Hub, the Global Shapers Tshwane Hub, to give us opening remarks.
Hi everyone, good evening. I hope you guys are here in good spirit and you guys are excited to be part of today's webinar because I am definitely amped. I have to say that I'm very, very excited that LCOY is happening again this year. And we definitely have to give all gratitude for today to the South African Climate Action Network for leading hosting today's webinar in collaboration with the Global Shapers Community Tshwane Hub, the South African Youth Climate Change Coalition, and the African Leadership Academy. Because this is indeed a collaborative effort, and the willingness to organize and host this year's LCOY should definitely not go unrecognized. Because you are creating a really, really needed platform for young people to come together at a local level and engage and share their perspective on the topic of climate change. So with that being said, we also do want to thank you, LCOY Working Group of Yongo, the official youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, for fully supporting and endorsing that we as young people are afforded the opportunity to have a safe space together and effectively engage in issues of climate change and environmental protection, as well as sustainable development in the build up to the upcoming COP. I'm not sure if everybody is clued up on climate change, but I will say that today will provide a platform for everybody to be educated as well as for us to engage, teach each other and learn with each other on the topic of climate change. Because climate change is a global challenge that does affect all of us, and the impact it has differs from person to person. And we are aware that it's threatening our ecosystem as well as community livelihood and general basic needs. So many of these problems are unknown to us at the moment, and such platforms give us the opportunity to actually come together to share and support each other on and taking action, climate resilience, so that we are prepared to respond to the events and the trends of climate change. So we are here today specifically as a build up to this year's COP28, which will be taking place on the 30th of November in Dubai, to collectively create principles for urban South African youth engagement in climate policy, which will also be submitted as a contribution to COY 18, the Global Youth Statement. So we are here to put our heads together. And by put our heads together, as in everybody that's part of this webinar today, we are inviting you to actually take this advantage to fully participate and be part of today's discussion, as well as be empowered as a young person in South Africa to contribute to promoting climate action. Because I'm sure, as most of you are aware, that it is a global complex issue that cannot be tackled only by certain people, but requires all of us to be part of coming up with solutions and taking actions. So, like I said in the beginning, not to worry if you feel like you don't understand what this is about. And for those that do understand, they will be here to take you through many things, as well as the Climate Ambition to Accountability Project will be shared will be sharing the position paper on exploring meaningful youthful engagement in South African climate policy. So they'll take you through as to the content of the paper, the reason behind it, and everything. Um, and I hope that today will actually build on last year's obligation um, that the young people of South Africa had as a statement on COP27, which is to uphold human rights. And upholding human rights also means that as young people, we need to start actually demanding that our voices as young people is heard and that we are part of influencing policy as well as the decisions that are made by decision makers so that young people are represented effectively in climate negotiations. So, without taking up a lot of your time, I hope that we can engage meaningfully in today's webinar. We can share ideas as well as contribute to drawing up the principles for today. And I think that's all from my side. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Kolola. Such a good way to begin this webinar. I hope that you guys are a little bit hyped. I think she gave a great overview of the different stakeholders that are involved in today's webinar, a really good background and to give us some context so that we understand where we're moving forward to. But for those of us that are not familiar with YOUNGO or with LCOY in general, which stands for the Local Conference of Youth, we have a representative from YOUNGO's LCOY working group here today. His name is Hassan Imam. Last year, he was a co-host of COY 17, and he's going to give us an overview, or rather an introduction to YOUNGO and to LCOY. Hassan, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much. How are you all? I will share my screen. I am a member of YOUNGO Global Coordination Team and LCOY working group. I was been in YOUNGO since 2018 when I just meet YOUNGO at COY 14 and COP24. Since that time, I joined YOUNGO actively and the LCOY working group and participated in many other conferences. But my main focus started from the LCOY. And now I am a co-founder and CEO of ACT Sustainable Egypt. It is a social enterprise here in Egypt, works in climate change. And one of the big parts that we are working on is youth engagement and youth empowerment. And sure, we are organizing the LCOY also here in Egypt since 2019. So this is a quick introduction from my background and my different engagements. I have a degree in civil engineering as well. So this is a full background now. So I just want to give you an introduction about YOUNGO and how it started. So back to 1992 at Rio Summit, Rio Earth Summit. It's like the first official summit that tackled the climate change. So this is at this time. It is declared that and identified 9 sectors, which include different stakeholders to the climate as a stakeholders. After that, in 2005, at Montreal Conference of Parties at COP there in Montreal, it formalized that at COP 11 that the international youth movement to be a climate international youth movement. And then in 2009 at Copenhagen, the Secretariat and member states are officially recognized youth as an observer for the constituency of its own. So now we have the youth and children represented as observers at the COP space. And after that, in 2011, the constituency confirmation that formalized that Yongo to represent the formal voice of children and youth in the UNFCCC process. Why we started from Rio Summit. I just wanted to highlight that the youth movement started back from 1992, and we achieved the confirmation of constituency at 2011. So we believe that the continuous work starting from the back will achieve the targets, even if it's late, but it will achieve with continuous working. And it is the story, but we want to solve the climate change. So this is just the beginning. So what is the mission of Yongo? The mission of Yongo that we see that we should give the awareness and knowledge and capacity building for youth from all over the world about climate change. And we should build a collaboration and cooperation between all youth networks. We have here different organizations and different entities are organizing the local coherent South Africa. They are lobbying and they are advocate for the climate change, and they are all together to have the youth action. And this is basically our mission. And our vision is we see that when we are empowering the youth to deliver meaningful and impactful positive local change, it will impact the international action. And we see that when the UN were sitting with the youth together to decision make about the climate change, youth should be taken seriously. So we see ourselves as part of these actions to be taken seriously, as it's our future, it is our it is what we will go, and we are the most affected to the climate change in the future. So we should be taken seriously. So this is our mission and vision. Yeah, as I said before, Yongo has been received a confirmation to be part of the constituency. So what is the constituency? The UN FCCC, which is the UN for climate change, or for the UN Convention of Climate Change, they have the NGOs or the civil society different sectors. So one of these sectors, as we see here, we have the bingo, so the civil society who are advocating for businesses. Can you see the mouse now? And the second one is researchers. So there is another NGOs who are advocating for researchers according to the climate change. And there is farmers, there is trade unions, there is women and gender, and there is indigenous people, and there is environmental organizations, and there is local governments and authorities. And we have here the Yongo. So this is the body of UN FCC civil society constituencies, as Yongo is part of it. So as Yongo is part of it, what is the participation of the youth at the UNFCCC? We see that in Yongo, we should be flat structure, we should be all geared, we should all taking every decision in consensus. So everyone should be aligned, and we see that every voice is equal. Our target is to be a body of UN as any other state. We see that youth should be part of this as any other state and have a voting rights. So this is what we are doing. As I said before, we are doing awareness and knowledge and capacity building to raise the capacity building and awareness of youth. The climate change is based on science, so we should all together, based on science, we should all together know what is the climate change and how we can solve it. So we giving the awareness and we encourage youth to give the awareness and knowledge needed uh, to um, to fight for to fight against the climate change. And after the awareness and the capacity building, we see that we must collaborate and cooperate each other to do this together. If we are not together, we can do that. So we see that we must cooperate each other to do this. And after collaborating and after cooperation, we do this policy, we do recommendations and lobbying and advocating for it. So awareness, collaboration, policy, and advocacy. So this is our plan. So according to the last, we have different actions that we take. Part of this action is the local code. I just want to highlight how it goes under the Yongo. We have here individuals and organizations all under the Yongo constituency. So if you are an individual from South Africa, you can be part of Yongo. If you are an individual from any country, you can be part of Yongo. If you are organization and aligned with the guidelines of Yongo, you can be part of this. And part of this group, we have working groups of Yongo. So there is a different working groups, people who are focused in different themes, who are working together to achieve more like smaller targets. So this is the working groups. And we have here the global coordination team. The global coordination team, they are trying to be like organizing and to coordinate between the working groups and the individuals and what is all under the constituency. And we have here the focal points. So this is here some of the working groups. We have two different working groups categories. The number one is thematic working group. Like in the UNFCCC, we have different articles and we have different topics. So we have different working group according to these thematics. For example, agriculture, human rights, health, NDC, finance and market, and loss and damage. So this is a kind of working groups that we have. And there's a different working groups, and these working groups are more operational working groups, like Conference of Youth working group, like LCOY working group, like policy working group, like awareness working group. So this is a different category of working group. So the LCOY is part of the operational working group. Yeah, and as I said before, Yongo is part of Yongos have like individuals and organizations. We are more than 10,000 individuals, and we are more than 1,000 youth organizations and NGOs. And here by this QR code, you can be part of Yongo officially. So is it easy to be part of Yongo? Yes, just apply through this and to be part of the official youth constituency for the UNFCCC. Yeah, so I want to highlight the role of the LCOY itself. So as we said, the LCOY is part of Yongo. So what is the LCOY? The LCOY, it is events with regional or national focuses that empower youth to participate in climate action and decision making locally or regionally. So it is a framework that we see that we want to have a national movement. We want to have like a global movement. So we should start from roots. We should start from the local action. So this is what the local COI is standing for. So, and we say local COI. So it is like the local version. How it is all aligned. We have here the UNFCCC, and the UNFCCC have COP, and they are negotiating together around about the climate change at COP. So this is the conference of parties. So how we can push our demands at COP? We have here the COI. The COI is standing for the Global Conference of Youth. It is a conference that it is at the same country of COP each year. Like if the COP will be in South Africa, so the COI will be in South Africa. If the COP will be in Australia, so the COI will be in Australia. And it is not people, they are not all access to the COI. It is limited. So we have local COIs. We have local COIs in different countries, as we have here in South Africa. So each local COI giving the awareness locally, networking locally, and submit the youth demands locally. And all these demands are all together, and some representatives from the local COIs here will be going to the COI to finalize the global statement, and some of these youth will be advocating also at COP. So we have here, starting from the local to the regional and to the global one, then to the COP. So this is how the LCOY mechanism is. Yeah, so this is the objective of the local COI. It is the same of Yongo: capacity building, networking, and policy building. So we starting the policy change starting from the local COIs. So it is all about climate negotiation. It's about activism. It's about education. It's about all these things that you see. So the local COI could contain all these topics and maybe more. So here, this is like how the local COIs and regional COIs can contribute. More young people know more about climate crisis. Local network, like we have here, different organizations together. So we want to build more local networks, and we want to make your voice heard at the climate negotiations. Like you have something in your mind that will change the world. So you can start from the local COI, and this will be part of the global youth statement, and it will be at the global negotiations. Yeah, how the local COI is look like, as you see now, it is public for youth, so everyone could be participate. It is welcome for everyone. It is always from 1 to 3 days. Some countries are doing more. It is according to how you can do it. It is according to your resources. So so it is like this, and it is creative, and there's some people are hosting exhibitions, theaters, and different creative things that youth can follow. Yeah. So this is the whole idea of Yongo and the whole idea of local COI. If you interested to be part of Yongo, it is easy way. The local COI is offering the local COI of South Africa is offering you to join Yongo and to be part of the global climate movement. Thank you so much, and be part of the global movement.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Hassan. Thank you. I see that we have some very positive reactions coming up. I'd like to state that this is now open for questions, a Q&A session. If there are any questions, please let us know. Please raise your hand and we can take your questions the stage. Nkopori, you should be able to speak.
So I would like to thank the presenter for quite an informative presentation. My inquiry is with regards to joining Yonku. Can the presenter share us in the chat box the link to access the website in terms of registrations and further details? That is my first main inquiry. I'll come afterwards.
Okay, all right, thank you. If you are joining perhaps on your computer, you can scan that QR code on the screen, and that will lead you to a Yango join-in link. But we will also search for the link and pop it in. Do you have a second inquiry?
Yeah, my second inquiry is in terms of youth participation. Just like in general, in is Yaku and other youth organizations participating in local matters, such as, for instance, the just energy transition, or is the participation more at a global level at COP? Thank you.
Okay. Hossam, would you like to take this question, and then I can follow up?
Yeah, we can take all the questions, and I will answer it all together.
All right. Okay. Let's see.
Hi everyone, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so thank you so much for the presentation. The presenter mentioned something about how these local COI groups, essentially what we do is we sit down and we discuss the issues and problems. And I just wanted to know, the issues that we discuss, should they be in relation to COP28, or can they just be any issues that we would like to be raised in COP20 in COP28? Because my thing is, for example, this year's theme is technology, innovation, frontline communities, and finances and inclusion. So if we're having local group COIs, should we discuss these themes, or can we discuss other issues that we believe we have the solutions for, or are we just exclusively stuck to these themes?
Thank you for that question. In the interest of time, I'm just going to have to cut these questions at this stage. Please note that there is going to be a section of the program where we will have more interactions. But just to keep to the program, please allow Hossam to answer these questions, and then we will move forward.
Okay, great. Thank you for these questions, guys. I shared the link for the Yongo to be part of Yongo. The link is here. And according to the topics of LCOY, actually, at the Yongo policy team, we have a recommendation for the topics that we will discuss. These topics are aligned with the COP agenda and aligned with the Yongo agenda itself. But you are free to have your points as you are having your local needs. So the local COIs, one of the main of the local COIs is to highlight the local needs. So you are here in South Africa, you have a different context. You will mention the context of South Africa. If you want to make this context to be shared globally, so it's okay to mention it also to the declaration that you will send it to Yongo. So this is the aim of hosting local COIs. We have an example. We are working in Egypt for the local COI in different cities. We have like like local COYs in different 7 cities, and each city have a different agenda. There is a main theme, but each city is different according to the theme of this city. Like it is a coastal city, or it is a city based on agriculture, or it is a city with some industrial actions. So it is different from each other. I think I missed one question. If someone is, yeah.
There was a question about whether local issues such as a just transition are discussed at a global level.
Sure. Like part of the COP is these topics. You can follow what the Yango is sharing, and you can follow the presidency, the COP presidency, and they are having the agenda of each COP and different conferences. And I think by joining Yango itself also, it will allow you to network with young people globally, and you will share information together, and you will educate yourselves. So it is a good step to you to have more awareness.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Hassan. Really much appreciated. I think now we're going to move on to the next part of our agenda, and this is just going to be me presenting exactly what our objectives for LCOY South Africa are. So I really like that Hassan emphasized the importance of local action in the general framework of how Yango operates, right? So the work that is done at a local level should be communicated through LCOY, and that will inform the regional COYs and then the global COY, and those participants who finalize the global youth statement at COY will then take it forward to COP, right? So this is really something to keep in mind when you think about what our objectives are for LCOY South Africa. So much like LCOY's objectives are to focus on policy and advocacy, that's definitely what we'll be doing as well. So you'll notice that in the beginning, there was something mentioned about building on the Youth Climate Champions position paper, which was titled Exploring Meaningful Youth Engagement in South African Climate Policy. So what we really want to do there, and when we did a lot of stakeholder engagement and we discussed the position paper, there was a lot of back and forth about what exactly constitutes meaningful youth engagement. And this is something that's very difficult for us to define really, or rather to find common ground on. And we noticed in the position paper that perhaps it would have been useful for us to have principles to have introduced the topic before necessarily jumping into it. And that's what we would like to do. We would like to come up with principles of urban youth engagement in South African climate policy. That way we can build forward in terms of any other policy advocacy that we create or advocate for. And that's what we're doing in this webinar. So we are co-creating these principles, and these principles will then form part of our LCOY South Africa report and policy input to the COY 18 Global Youth Statement. So everything that we discussed today here, whether it is a comment that you popped in the chat or something that you're going to discuss at a later stage in this webinar, is really going to contribute and help us formulate our policy input. And that's how your opinions here at a local level on, really on the ground are going to contribute to a global conversation. So our second objective is to empower youth through a capacity building program. So while we have this virtual component, we're going to have a physical LCOY itself. And I'm not going to say too much about the details there, but this physical LCOY is really supposed to be a capacity building program that is informed by youth. So again, everything that you mentioned is of interest to you here today is going to inform our program. So we've already engaged with certain stakeholders to try to see what sort of a program can help youth engage in policy in creative ways, in ways that inspire them, in ways that make things simple. Because we find that there's a lot of interest shown by people that are more learned in the space about policy and diplomacy in the climate space, but there's also interest from people that don't necessarily understand it. And so what we're trying to do is to have an LCOY that will meet, the various needs of various youth at different levels of climate action that they are right now. And finally, we're trying to expand and strengthen youth networks. So this is just to address the issue of youth operating and a lot of civil society members across the board, I think, really relate to this, just operating in silos. So it's not necessarily about us being here as our respective organizations, but us being here as youth in South Africa, contributing to work, contributing and pushing for climate action that is meaningful for youth, right? So those are the objectives of our LCOY. And you being here today is helping us meet one of those objectives. And when we get to the meaty part of the agenda, we're really going to get into co-creating these principles. And we encourage you to please say whatever it is that you feel, anything that you feel is important towards this conversation, please feel free to mention it. Pop it in the chat. When we get to drafting the actual principles, please feel free to write exactly what your thoughts are, because that is what we're here. But that's what we're here for. So don't feel like you have a so-called stupid opinion or anything like that. Yeah, and I hope that we're able to move forward together. So we can have a few questions and answers at this stage before we get on to the next section, which will be an overview of the YCC position paper that I mentioned before, exploring meaningful youth engagement in South African climate policy. So I'm sure if you have any questions, you can bring them up now before we head on to the next part of the agenda. All right, you should be able to speak.
Hi again. So I just wanted to ask, I am currently working on a project that looks into climate awareness in rural areas. In terms of the objectives, does to a certain extent, do these objectives to a certain extent look into going to rural communities to try and spread climate awareness there, especially since the LCOY is going to be launched? Will it also be able to cater for people, individuals that reside in rural communities?
Thank you for that question. So you'll notice that we very carefully phrased the first objective to speak to urban youth, because we are aware that that is the reach and access that we have at this stage. So it would be unfair and, in fact, untruthful for us to say that we are speaking to all youth, whereas we do not have the necessary access and networks to reach youth in rural communities, right? Because definitely the work of community-based organizations is important and is needed, but those are not necessarily the partners that we have for this LCOY. But that's definitely something of importance that should be raised. Sandile, you have a question?
Good evening to those who are in the eastern side, and good afternoon to those who are in the western side of the globe. My question is it's with regards to the age group, because I understand in South Africa you only become youth from the age of 14 or 16 up until the age of 8. And because I understand most of us, like, who are in the mid-30s, we no longer like all part of the youth category according to the South African law. But I was wondering, because most of the youth I am exposed to and I work with in grassroots communities, most of them who understand the concept of climate change are usually more at, over the age of 30 and 35. And how does the LCOY and Yango actually work with the age group? In terms of what is the age limit of Yango and the LCOY for us to be able to participate? Because I feel like we've been left out since we are over 60.
Thank you for that, Sandile. So I'll speak to our LCOY's age limit, and then Hassan can then elaborate on Yango. So what we had put in the description for the event is that this is open to youth from ages 16 to 34. And so that is our categorization of youth. So I understand that you feel as though when you're over 30 in certain spaces, you no longer qualify as youth, but that's not necessarily the definition that we're working with. Hossam, would you like to elaborate on who exactly counts as youth under Yango guidelines?
Yeah, actually, as Yongo as the UN, the youth are from 18 to 35. But as we are the Yongo, it is a constituency of youth and children, welcoming the children to be part of this, and we are advocating to make the children are part of this also. So this is we still advocating for this.
Thank you, Hassan. I think this will be of particular relevance to our one of our partners for LCOY, which is the African Leadership Academy that has both youth and children in attendance. We'll take one more question. I don't know if that's an old hand or a new hand.
No, I've just it's a new hand.
Okay.
Sure. I just would like to find out. Since this is my first time having to engage at a youth level when it comes to climate change. Can someone please clarify for me the relationship or the link between LCO and YANCO, and how often do this meeting take place?
Okay. Hossam, would you like to take that question?
I am sorry, I didn't hear it well.
Okay. He asked what the link between LCOY and Yango is and how often LCOYs take place.
Yeah, the LCOY is one of the Yongo working groups, operational working groups. And the LCOY here in South Africa, it has a local focus. So the LCOY working group, the people who are coordinating between all local COYs are part of Yongo, as it is part of the working groups of Yongo. I hope that I answered it well.
Yes, you have. So if one has joined Yongo, does it necessarily mean that they have joined ELCO, or there's another opportunity to join Yonko and ELCO? How does it work in terms of joining and participation?
To be part of Yongo, you just apply through this link that I sent it before, and you will be officially part of Yongo, and you could choose whatever you want from working groups. If it is local working group, it's okay. There's different working groups, more than 30 working groups. There is different working groups according to the themes, operational ones, and there is a thematic ones. So you choose between these working groups, and you could be actively working in each of working groups that you want.
Okay. We still have a few more minutes allocated for Q&A, so I'm just going to answer these questions out loud in the question and answer chat. So where would you be able to see a list of all LCOY SA partners as they are? I'm going to pop a link in the chat so that you can see our social media pages, but that's where all of the information pertaining to LCOY South Africa is. And if there are any updates to the partner list, you'll see them reflected on our social media platforms. So currently, the partners for LCOY South Africa are the Climate Action Network South Africa, the Global Shapers Community Tshwane Hub, and the South African Youth Coalition for Climate Change, and the African Leadership Academy. How long has the LCOY been operating? Okay, so this is more of a question for Yango, I suppose, because I'm not sure if this is a question. Are you asking how many LCOY South Africas there have been?
Yeah, actually, each year there is one local COY for each country. So we are encouraging youth from the same country to collaborate each other, to build a network, and to work on the local coin for the South Africa. But if you are asking of what is the if this the second or third version of the LCOY of South Africa, I think the people who can answer this is maybe the organizing team. Maybe they are more following this information.
Yes, interestingly enough, I would say Kwilu is most well versed on how many LCOYs in South Africa there have been. And he was planning on giving some reflections on the process of different LCOYs over time in his career in the climate action space as a youth advocate at the end of the session. So I don't know if you would mind waiting for him to give those reflections at the end. Is that okay? Okay, and then Bertha's question, are there spaces for youth who have energy solutions to present or to have access to stakeholders that can assist with the realization of these visions? Bertha, would these be spaces within Yango or spaces at LCOY South Africa? If you can raise your hand, I can allow you to speak to clarify.
Thanks, Made. So I think Yango and LCOY within those spaces. So just listening to the speaker, the presenter, it was said that, you know, we would try and find solutions that are solutions that are region focused or country focused. And I think at this moment we are facing, you know, load shedding and having to look at the just transition and solutions or youth-led solutions around that. So just wanted to find if there are spaces for young people who would like to create energy solutions, if there are spaces for them to pitch to certain, you know, stakeholders that can make these visions true. I think as we speak to the different problems that we have or challenges, we also maybe would like to speak to the different solutions that the youth can participate in. So I think that was just my point. Thanks, Mide.
Okay, thank you, Bertha. Thank you for that. I think this is something that we can really get into when we start answering questions to co-create our principles. But I'm not sure if Hossam would like to give any further information, aside from the fact that there are working groups in Yango that speak specifically to energy issues on different levels. So if you're speaking about the just transition, that's often covered in either the loss and damage working group or the climate finance working group.
Yeah, all these working groups are part of Yango. Actually, there's a working group focusing on energy, and there is a working group focuses on loss and damage. Yeah, so it's like different themes. So you will find it through Yango, and if you want to add a different theme to the Yango, as Yango is representing all youth, you can come up with this suggestion, and the GCT team will discuss it with you, and we can add it as a working group as well. So this is how it goes in Yango.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that. This brings us to our next speaker. But before that, I just wanted to say thank you, Hossam, for giving that really important information about Yango. And thank you to everyone for engaging on the objectives. I hope that we now have a clearer understanding of why exactly we're here today and where we're trying to go. So over to you, Nathma. Nathma is a member of the YCC, Youth Climate Champions Bootcamp cohort of 2022. She was a team leader and lead author of the position paper, which we have referred to a couple of times today, titled Exploring Meaningful Youth Engagement in South African Policy.
Thank you so much, Mudehi. I'm Nathma Sami. Please give me 1 second. I just want to share my screen or my presentation. Good evening, respected audience, youth, and organizers of the event. Thank you so much for affording me this opportunity. I'm Nathma Sami. At present, I'm a research assistant at UNISA, completing my honors degree in psychology with a focus on the psychological impact of climate change within a South African context. I was fortunate to be one of the lead authors on the position paper. The position paper advocated and highlighted the growing need for greater youth engagement in climate policy processes in South Africa. And I have to admit, it was one of the best learning experiences and growth experiences I've ever had. So Ivana, if we can just move to slide 2, please. Okay, so as we collaborated as a group on the creation of the position paper, it became very evident that in order for our voices to be heard as the youth, we needed to be very clear about what the problems were in the policy processes and what we as the youth needed to be empowered to overcome them. We needed to be clear and we needed to work towards a shared definition of what it meant to be meaningfully engaged in climate policy processes. So being clear was the first step essentially in understanding how and what we needed from different stakeholders in order to be meaningfully engaged. And just the term meaningful engagement itself was already the first step which created the most hurdles, or the first set of hurdles for us as the youth. But moving on to slide 3. Okay, so as we could see that for us as the youth, a good starting point with the position paper was looking at what our calls to action would be, as we felt our calls to action would basically outline what meaningful engagement of us as the youth would be in the policy processes in relation to climate change. The calls to action would be directed at society as a whole. So firstly, we directed the calls to action at ourselves, the youth. We recognized the active role that we would have to play when it came to ensuring our inclusion and participation in spaces. Secondly, meaningful youth engagement would also need large societal change. So we couldn't do it on our own. We did need society to engage with us and assist us in the journey. And this meant that everyone would have to be involved, from government at a local to a national level, to policymakers, to educational institutions, from primary to tertiary level, as well as SEOs and NGOs and communities. Everyone's engagement would therefore pave the way for meaningful youth engagement in the climate processes. Now, why I'm indicating the stakeholders that would be engaged is because as I'm going to go through the different calls to action, it's going to become really evident that at each call to action, almost all of these role players will have something that they have to do in order to ensure that it materializes or it comes to fruition. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, we'll have the calls to action. And these calls to action would revolve around 5 pillars of what meaningful engagement would actually be. So we reference them as our 5 pillars of meaningful engagement, but they actually are call to action in our position paper. And the aim was that they could at least assist us to restore the balance in decision-making processes and spaces. So let's take a moment to explore them, and we'll start with capacity strengthening as our first call to action and then move through the others. So we can move to our next slide, please. Okay, so firstly, capacity strengthening. Capacity strengthening is defined as the improvement, enhancement, and strengthening of a system to ensure more effective, sustainable, and successful goal achievement. In light of meaningful youth engagement, this refers to the youth gaining more access to training and tool provision needed to actively engage and participate in different stages of climate policy processes. This can take on many forms. At primary school, it may be climate education, literacy, or community engagement that is made easily accessible and is free of linguistic barriers. At a community level, the dissemination of climate change information should be culturally appropriate and depoliticize depoliticize in order to contribute to the transformative action and community engagement. So what this means is that, for example, at a community level, if we have certain education information that is being, let's say, shared in a community, we need to ensure that it's culturally appropriate. We need to be sensitive to the needs of the community members. We also need to be sensitive to the linguistic barriers. So that would include, of course, ensuring that the information is in the languages that the people speak within that specific community. And it's also free of jargon, which really can lead to alienation of different people in different communities and makes it almost impossible for them to adopt anything related to climate change and climate policies. Okay, and then when we move from that, we also see that something else, right, was a key example that we could see when it came to obviously capacity strengthening was there was something of like what I would reference like a starting point with the PCC, which is the Presidential Climate Commission. And what they did was they tried to basically engage the youth or include the youth from a grassroots level by inviting them to provide written comments on the Just Transition Framework. Now, this was undoubtedly a step in the right direction. However, the first thing I think myself and all the other members working on the youth position paper thought was we could just imagine how amazing or how much more impactful it would have been if the youth could respond, having knowledge and having tools that would meaningfully translate their thoughts into the language of the policymakers, essentially. So, in essence, the emphasis I want to place here is that the youth need to be basically empowered with greater skills so that the greater skills can capture their ideas and can actually be implemented or can be accepted into the governing bodies or into the policymakers, let's say, world, right? Okay, Ivana, can we move to slide 6, please? Okay, so moving to our second call to action was the establishment of youth councils. So why are youth councils so important? Well, firstly, they give us a place and they also give us people to go to when we want to contribute our insight, our knowledge and concerns. Youth councils provide spaces for discussion and the coordination of our ideas. So when we have these youth councils, we don't feel so lost. We know there's a place to go to and we know that there's someone that's going to listen to us and actually take our ideas, our views and move it or transform it into something else where we know it's not falling on deaf ears, so to say. The other function of our youth councils or establishing youth councils is that they allow us to share and create awareness as a representative and a collective body that can then advocate and pressurize stakeholders in the creation of effective and equitable policies that are reflective of meaningful youth engagement. And in saying this, sometimes it is a matter of there's more power in numbers or in groups essentially. And this is where it comes into play. Usually we feel like if it's only one of us that has a perspective or a view, we're not going to be taken really serious. But when there's an actual youth council, there is much more power behind it, and there is a higher chance essentially that the views and the opinions are going to be taken into consideration. Next, we move on to the next slide, which covers our third call to action. And the third call to action considers how the youth can further be empowered to climate action. This includes policymakers supporting or funding the creation of safe spaces like town halls, where the youth can engage in free discussion and debate. So the youth need a place that they can go to have these discussions, to connect to each other and to connect to other individuals that can provide them guidance, not just at certain events or big events essentially, but almost on a weekly or a day-to-day basis. That ease of access is really, really important. We also looked at policymakers strengthening existing programs and providing resources, opportunities and collaborative support through youth-led initiatives or through provision of support to youth-led initiatives. So something we can see is that there are already a lot of youth-led initiatives in South Africa, but they do require some support. And if CSOs can provide that support to them and strengthen them essentially, we can have really a force to reckon with within the sphere of climate change and climate policy action. Moving to our next slide, we take a look at how the empowerment of the youth in South Africa can translate into the participation in global climate policies that have a national impact. So when it comes to a call to action and also defining meaningful youth engagement, we take into consideration that this meaningful youth engagement is not just going to be at one level, but it needs to be at a local level, it needs to be at a national level, it needs to be at a global level, essentially. Right? And when we say that, we know, of course, that we're going to require a lot of collaboration in which stakeholders have to conduct research and find barriers that are preventing meaningful youth engagement. So the first step essentially is having our stakeholders take a look at the situation and see, okay, what is standing in the way of meaningful engagement of youth at this point in time. And when we talk about stakeholders, we're speaking about university systems, we're talking about different research being conducted within the South African context as well, and then finding also solutions to the found problems within our context of South Africa. We then also had to take a look at the policy processes that needed to be adjusted, such as the involvement criteria, right? And when we speak about the involvement criteria, we can see that sometimes before we want to engage in policy processes, we don't even meet the criteria, whether the criteria is, for example, being able to converse in a certain jargon, or whether it is having a certain qualification or being within a sphere of, let's say, climate policies. Some of these are really good, but on the other hand, a lot of them are leading to discrimination, where people with voices and concerns are being left out of the discussion forum because of these criteria. So one call to action, or one thing that we wanted to take a look at, of course, is adjustment of this involvement criteria so that more people could be engaged within the policy processes. Thirdly, we looked at Policy 101. And Policy 101 is basically education that we wanted to be implemented at a tertiary education level. Right? And Policy 101 would basically engage and also educate people within the tertiary education sphere or other spheres as well as to how they can engage in policy making. And once they were empowered on the how, they could then find where they could essentially engage in this policy creation or policy making process. In addition to this, the other aspect was also that while conversations and youth councils should engage in initiatives that inform both national and global climate policies, there also needs to be opportunities for engagement with COP and other global climate policy processes. So something that we saw as the youth was that we saw that we did feel marginalized and we did feel alienated from the big events, for example, COP, where we felt it was very difficult for us to engage with those processes, or we felt it was very difficult for us to get some space in the room. So essentially, one of our calls to action was also finding ways to increase our participation in COP, and also having policymakers and all other stakeholders support us as the youth within this process. Moving on to our next slide and our last call of action within the position paper. We take a look at climate, we take a look at the climate policy process, which is going to focus basically on the collaboration, monitoring, and evaluation. So before I dive into this, what we should remember is that when we speak about climate policies, they lay the foundation for a lot of changes. And these climate policies, they don't occur like in one step or in one stage. Essentially, there's different stages that takes place. And we saw this really when we were creating the position paper. And it was really shocking to us because at each stage, there was special skills that you did need to have and special knowledge you needed to engage with. So when it comes to this aspect of it, we see that there is obviously emphasis on the youth needing opportunities to provide the input at all stages. So, for example, when it comes to creation of the policy, we need to have some input at that stage. When it comes to monitoring policy development, but also policy implementation, there needs to be input from youth. And when it comes to evaluation, there also needs to be input from the youth. And the reason for this is that when we have this, the youth can basically also engage in holding themselves accountable and also holding other stakeholders that have agreed to these policies accountable for what was agreed upon. The youth also need to do something else. There's something that we call outlining indicators of success. So when we're creating a policy, there's also the importance of outlining what the indicators of success are. When will these goals, or when is a policy effective for us? What will be the signs, and when will we be essentially happy? And when the youth have this power, or they're empowered to basically outline the indicators of success, they can obviously drive those policies, and they can also drive the pursuit of transformative goals that is going to really transform society. Okay, the other aspect is obviously the leveraging of networks and building on existing efforts of youth to ensure that we have cumulative progress of youth engagement. So here, what we're going to focus on essentially is that when it comes to the different types of networks that's already established within the climate policy sphere and the climate policy space, there is this opportunity for networks to be strengthened and these networks to be coordinated with young people and youth, let's say, programs essentially, in order to give youth obviously not leadership, but also some guidance within the sphere, and also give them more accessibility to the resources that they need to make some changes. Okay, so essentially those are the calls to action that we basically covered in our position paper and what we were looking for. If we can move to the last slide, please, Ivana. I would just like to conclude by saying meaningful engagement of youth in climate policy processes relies on a shared and dependable definition of meaningful engagement. The shared definition is well linked to the calls to action outlined in the position paper, which hopes to shape the ways in which various stakeholders engage and provide support to the youth throughout the climate policy process. And while arriving and ensuring a shared definition of youth engagement is adopted may require a lot of coordination and collaboration, the resulting meaningful engagement of the youth will have the potential to drive societal change that can be realized, change that can be sustained, and change that ensures we have a world which is characterized by a just and equitable transition that becomes our reality. With that, I would like to conclude and thank the audience and all the organizers for their time this evening, as well as Ivana for saving the day and sharing the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Nathma. Well done. What a great overview of the really brilliant work that you all did on the position paper. And I hope that that has given us even more context about where exactly we are basing our position from and what we are considering ahead of co-creating principles of urban youth engagement in South African climate policy. The next session will be led by Nontutuzelo Nikiwe from the Global Shapers Community Tshwane Hub. This is where we will be co-creating our principles for urban youth engagement in South African policy. So I'm going to hand over to Nontutuzelo now, and we will post the link to the Google Doc in the chat. Please feel free to, while the session is happening, please log into the document and write your answers to those questions that are listed there. And also note that should you not have enough time, or you feel as though your views are not being captured adequately at this point in time, there will be a Google form that will be made available via our LCOY South Africa social media pages, where you can submit further inputs if today is not sufficient for you. But again, I really encourage you to write all of your thoughts and to give all of your opinions in this next session, because this is what we're really going to use for our policy input and to submit towards the Global Youth Statement. Okay, over to you, Nontutuzelo.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to assume I'm audible and just go ahead and speak. So my name is Nontutuzelo. I am representing the Global Shapers in the Tshwane Hub. I'm the outgoing curator. Well, at this point, I'm an alumni. I think outgoing is far too late to say that now. but I was the curator in 2022 up to last month. And I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion today. I'm really glad also that we get to do the LCOY for a second year as the Global Shapers as well, because we did it last year as well. And so that was really great. And so for today, I think also we have about 25 minutes, I would guess, just to chat through, I think, some of the questions that we have, and specific to really making this as personal to us and to our context as possible. So we want to make sure that for all of us that our voices are heard in the way that they need to be. I think some important issues have already come up around, youth who are based in rural areas, around the representation of youth and what that means and how we define that. Because also, the impacts of climate change are not limited to just youth, as much as we definitely need to amplify the voices of youth as well. And so our first question is reflecting on instances where you have witnessed the impact of climate change in your urban environment, and also how those experiences motivate you to engage in climate policy discussions. And so we, as much as we want you to also be writing in the document, we'd love to hear from you in person as well. If you feel like you're not really in the mood to tap into the document, we'd love to hear from you as well. So if you can raise your hand or leave a comment in the chat, but as best as possible, if you can raise your hand so that we can hear from you, and we'll take down notes for you as well, as a part of this. So any instances where you've witnessed the impact of climate change in your urban environment. So Mudiahi has already mentioned that we are focused on urban youth as much as possible. And so for all of us living in urban areas, I'm sure we have experienced to some extent the impacts of climate change in our different contexts. And so we can reflect on that. If you have some thoughts, if you have a question, if you have an answer, an experience that you would love to share, please go ahead and raise your hand so we can hear from you.
Wow, everyone, don't speak all at once. Anybody?
So maybe just from the Global Shapers community, and I think some of the work that we have done and what essentially really propelled our commitment to working in climate change, and especially bringing awareness around climate change as well, has been the floods that I think the Tshwane community often experiences. And I know that, across urban areas as well, this is a growing and a very serious challenge that has been happening. And so for us as the Global Shapers, some of our most basic, let me say, climate action work started with providing responses to communities that where flooding was not necessarily an occurrence. I think about 5 years ago, if not even longer before that. And all of a sudden, it's basically an annual thing that we have to figure out how to respond to. And so that's resulted in many people being displaced from their homes, and also, the with the growth also of informal settlement as a result in other areas, which are also in areas that are prone to flooding as well, because they can't find space to set up their homes. And so these are the issues that we have had to experience, and more it's been happening annually, that we've had to find ways to gather donations and support and care for the families and the communities that have been displaced by flooding. And specifically in Centurion as well, the community has now there's a small informal community that was settled close to the stadium in Centurion, and they are no longer there. So they've had to be removed from that area, because every year for the past 3 years, their entire area was just completely flooded. And so, you also consider the personal possessions that get lost. A lot of people also losing, identity documents, and some of them were not South African as well. And you can imagine the nightmare that it is to lose something like your passport when you're in a foreign country as well. So these are the issues that we've had to kind of be able to respond to. And as a result, then we've, ramped up our climate action and what it looks like to be also more substantial in how it creates awareness and information and understanding in especially young people in high school specifically. And so that's what we're focused on over the past 2 years as well, in just supporting high school scholars to understand the impacts of climate and what they can do, right? And so that's the important aspect as well, is understanding the empowerment that we have the capacity or the ability to provide to young people. When we give them information, we also then are able to give them understanding of what they can do, right? So putting power back into their hands to understand that they are not helpless, they are not without an ability to respond to these challenges as well. So so hopefully I've opened up the floor a little bit for others to respond. I see there's a comment here from Louis. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Seeing the effects not right away, but in years as I grew up, right? So, and I think that's something we can all say, in how we see the changes in the seasons, right? It almost feels like we move straight from summer into winter, from winter into summer. There's almost nothing in between, in just because of the extremes of weather right now. Just, kind of the basics of what climate change can look like as well. Anybody else would like to share?
Hi, can I share something? I'm so sorry, I
Yes,
can't lift my hand. It's very interesting because I live in Port Elizabeth, which is in the Eastern Cape, and we've been essentially plagued with the opposite situation, where we've been basically struggling with a drought for the last few years, and the impact has been absolutely insane, where there's water shortages continuously. There's obviously a greater pricing on water, essentially, and accessibility to water, and it's essentially going throughout the entire community. So it doesn't matter where in the city you essentially live, you're still going to face those water shortages and situations where there's no water for, I would say, hours or days at a time, and you can see the entire system just breaking down within the city, which is absolutely terrible. And then obviously the other end of the extreme, where we're facing a really cold winter and we're really in shock because we were just plagued with a drought for the last few months, and all of a sudden we're having flooding as well in Port Elizabeth. So it's so interesting because it's so crazy, these shifts in the weather conditions.
Right. So it's that thing of moving from one extreme to the other, right? So it's almost like there is no in between, where you just essentially normalcy to some extent has been taken away in our weather and how we then exist around that, right? So I'm seeing some additional comments here about Day Zero in Cape Town a few years back. And it almost, Day Zero became sort of iconic in the worst kind of way, because it brought the world's attention to the effects of climate change, but also the fact that South Africa is a very water scarce country in itself. So in addition to that as well, I was reading not too long ago about the droughts in the Eastern Cape, and also coming from the Eastern Cape, knowing also that my family largely, to some extent depends on like food from the garden as a cost saving measure. And so how that has changed in the yields that they can bring from the garden to save on costs around food as well. And so things like that also are really important, and they matter to a lot of people's survival. And I'm seeing all the comments. I think we'll take them down, but just so that we can move on to the next topic of discussion, so we have enough time to everything. Thank you everyone for your I'm glad I opened up the floor, because now everybody's flowing. So we'll take down all of these comments that we've got in the chat as well, and add them to the doc. If you would like, you can also just copy it and paste it on, and then we'll sort it out later. So the next question is around creative and effective ways for urban South African youth to engage with policymakers regarding climate issues, and what methods can ensure our voices are heard. So before I open the floor again for myself, I'm going to give everybody a chance to see if you can respond, if you've got responses around that. But what creative and effective ways do you think we can start speaking to policymakers, whether it's at a local municipal level, considering our issues at a municipal level with services and basic needs, or at a more national government level? Any thoughts around that? Okay. So just with regards to that, I think again, reflecting on what we have done as the global shapers is just around the how we advocate at a local municipal level. So the global shaper community largely is built around ensuring that there is sufficient advocacy by youth at a local level, as much as we definitely want to also expand nationally and even internationally. And so the scope expands beyond that. But for us to first see how we have an impact within our local government structures, right? And so one of the things that we often, I think, even as a South African youth, from my perspective as a South African, but I think overall on the continent, understanding how low democratic engagement is by young people, and the continent of Africa has the youngest population in the world. So understanding that also, there's also that perspective that we need to consider around how active we are within our democracies. Are you voting, right? So think about, things like that, and whether you're paying attention to what our politicians are saying, because they are the ones who are creating the changes that we need to be seeing around climate, right? So what is what are our local mayors, what are our councillors saying about climate change and what they will do about it, right? What is our national government saying about climate change? And so that you can be informed, even as a voter and a person who is, I'm saying this in the most hopeful way, democratically active person on the decisions that you make on who is governing your nation, your local community, your local municipality, or state, whatever that is for you, right? So that, I think, for me is how we are, even from a global shaper perspective, that's how we play our part in doing this. And so it's also understanding that I think a lot of these the political parties, a lot of our municipalities are actually yearning for engagements with young people. It's just that a lot of them actually just don't know how. They don't know how to approach us. They don't know who to talk to. And so we have to be the ones who show that initiative and approach them. And so this is something that has worked for us, is to actually set up meetings and call some people at the local municipality and ask them for opportunities for us to engage with them, for us to partner with them, so that we then have that door open to be able to create room for discussions. And so this is the important thing, is I think for us to not wait for government to come to us, but for us to go to them. And that opens up the opportunity for us to challenge them on their lack of action. That opens up opportunity for us to hold them to account. But the biggest way we do that is exercising our democratic right to vote, right? That is how we hold our government accountable. And so they start to see, when we change our direction and how we vote, they also see that, we're paying attention to what they're doing and that things need to change, right? And so these are important issues when, electioneering is happening as well, that we are a part of the town halls or the campaigns that they bring to our communities, that we are a part of that as well, right? So we're engaging actively, that we are asking the important questions, so they understand that these are issues that are important to us, and they need to know that we're paying attention to how they respond to them, right? And so this is, for me, that we do not downplay our voices in being able to respond to these issues and these challenges, right? And so we have access in our municipalities. They provide us these opportunities, and so we have to think about how we do that creatively. And even if it's just to open the door as a start, and just sit through their boring meetings, which really it can be like that sometimes, and then come back and but that door is open, and they know that you are a young person or a youth-led organization that is interested in working with them to drive solutions around this work. And so this is important for us to be able to participate in, but we have to ourselves be paying attention to what is happening politically, because as much as it's an awful thing, but I mean, it really shouldn't be. Rather, is that climate change and how we respond to it, how we adapt, how we create change around it, is very much a political issue. Okay, anybody else with any views there? Rihanna, I see your question there. So we are actually doing a project to just look into political parties within South Africa that are putting in effective climate policies. It's quite a struggle at the moment because it's mostly used almost like a buzzword without any sort of substantial information around that. But we're trying to figure out ways to we're implementing a project to kind of figure out what these political parties are standing on regarding climate, and so hopefully we'll be able to put out some stuff around that pretty soon. But I think as South Africa is headed towards an election next year, we'll probably hear a little bit more around that. Okay, I'm seeing also quite a couple of comments as well. We'll be taking those down, but we'd love to hear your voices. So if you can, again, just raise your hand or raise your hand so that we can hear from you if you have any additional thoughts. So perhaps you can just reflect on the future you want to see in urban South Africa in terms of climate policy. So what would that actually look like for you in your mind, if you were to think about if we are seeing a political party like Rihanna was asking around, who is putting in effective climate policy? What in your mind is effective climate policy in this context? Maybe if I can put you on the spot, Rihanna, I can start with you.
Maybe I can make a quick comment.
Sure.
Hi, everybody. This is Kulegane Magwaza. I think from the point that you are making about political parties, I think we should sort of think of strategizing about next year's election in terms of what do we want the political parties to be like, because I think right now they're working on their political manifestos for next year. And I think from now on until the conference that we are preparing, we should have a strategy on just making sure that they have something that has to do with our demand in terms of climate justice in their manifestos. It's just a thought that I wanted to bring in here. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that. So, so I think maybe coming back to the point around understanding the power that we have to be able to be heard. And so I like the word of being strategic about how we position ourselves and how we consider what the effect of an election for any of us. I think there's quite a couple of elections coming up for a lot of African countries still in the next year. And so thinking about that, all of us as young people, but much more in the South African context as we are focused on LCOY as well. This is our opportunity, I think, to be specific about how we focus on that, right? Thank you. Okay, so sure, please go ahead.
Okay, I think maybe just coming into that in terms of the taking advantage of the national elections, as much as politicians use election season to get votes, we can use it to have conversations on public platforms, but also to interrogate or to question their manifestos if they do allude to climate change, because what we need is an intersectional approach to climate change. It cannot just be, a tick box exercise, or it cannot just be words. They need to have like certain frames in where they sort of have intersectional thematic areas in there. Although the highlight will be climate change, but we know that climate change is not an issue in silo, but it has also, a lot of issues linked to it, for food sovereignty, for example, energy issues, etc. Over.
Right. So, I mean, that's an important thing to bring up. Maybe just jumping onto the next thing around inclusivity in youth engagement. And as somebody did bring it up earlier as well, around how we are considering, spaces that are not necessarily urban and how we respond to that as well. And so that's an important factor. And perhaps, I'm so sorry, I can't remember who it was that brought up this question. If you can speak to that a little bit as well, and maybe your experiences in working in rural communities and what that can look like, because I think that also speaks to how we are resourcing the work of climate action for young people, but also in an inclusive way that is covering the different communities that need to be where the responses need to happen. When we consider, talking about the Eastern Cape, which is one of the most rural provinces that we have in the country, and so what are we doing to ensure that there's equitable access to resources, to information, to action and support structures available in those communities? And now speaking to the politics of it as well, that even there people are well informed in how they vote, so that they can see the effects of it, is not just about service delivery and having a road, but it's also then whether this community will be able to exist in its environment in the next 10 years. Just would love to hear any thoughts around that as well. So while we wait for that, I'm just going through some of the comments. Wangekile mentioned that we can mobilize through spaces such as churches in our communities. They have active young groups, and these are also the spaces where parties mobilize. And that's very true. And I think, again, when we're thinking about rural communities, that's definitely where, a lot of the political parties advocate from, is through the churches. Often the churches also are the central communities, like kind of hall where people gather as well. And so those are used and they definitely have youth groups as well in those. And so it's being active even in those structures as well. And coming back maybe a little bit to the issue around the intersectionality of these challenges as well, is then bringing the coming back also even to inclusivity, is issues around racial equity, class equity, and even other discriminations that a lot of people are facing. And as a result, they are less equipped. Their communities are less equipped. Their environments are less equipped to be able to respond better to the challenges of climate change. And so for us as Global South youth as well, so much more important to be having this conversation around what inclusivity can look like, is so that we can understand that we need to be the loudest voices, the most active voices, the most active participants to structures like LCOY and through organizations like Yango, that we need to be represented well within those structures as well. And so our voices and us learning what that can look like and what our advocacy can look like, then can lean into ensuring that there's representation of our issues, which tend to be quite unique in comparison to the global north, where they don't have necessarily the same challenges. When we think about the floods, starting with KZN and now even with KZN last year and with Eastern Cape this year, the time that it takes for us to be able to recover from those because of our financial capacity as a nation is so much more different when you think about the disasters that a lot of our global north countries face, that they are, to some extent, are able to recover much faster than we are able to. And that's an issue of how wealth disparities as well. And so being inclusive then creates the structures where there is better representation of all of the voices that are much more affected by climate change than a lot of the countries in the global north as well. And so that's how we need to, be thinking about inclusivity and the diversity of perspectives that come in to how we formulate climate policy as well. Okay, so we're running out of time, but I want to jump to the next question as well. And just thinking about the effectiveness of climate policy initiatives and what that can look like is then us thinking about what are the main principles. And so think about for you, right? We've reflected on how climate change is affecting us, maybe directly in our communities or even personally, or our families, in whatever community they may be based, as much as possible, even in urban structures. But now consider if you were to be speaking to a politician tomorrow, what are the things that you would be saying to them most important to you, the principles that should be included in what effective climate policy looks like? If you can raise your hand or share with us, that would be great.
Tutu.
Yeah.
Hi. So for those who don't know who I am, my name is Lerato, and I am part of the Global Shapers Tshwane Hub team. So if I were to have a conversation with our local councillor, who, by the way, is actually very active in our street affairs and all of that, I would actually make it a point that I make sure that he and his colleagues are aware that this climate change is not an international problem, because most of the time it's always reflected as if it's not something that we as in local communities cannot face. So I would make it a point that I educate him about that, because sometimes education part, especially for these people who are in leadership, that I feel like they do not really get. So that's the one point. Make it aware as well, like spread awareness as well, and get support from him, because I know people who are in political positions, they have more access to resources that local clubs or local organizations do not have. So just getting the buy-in from councillors, making a partnership rather than, because sometimes they feel like they are being attacked or somehow, so they don't necessarily participate. So making him or his colleagues be a part of the conversation and how they can fit into effectively being part of the mitigation rather than being part of the problem.
Right. Thank you for that. So I think that's an important input, and again, bringing us back to the fact that, you know, we as young people should not be seeing ourselves as helpless or incapable of voicing the issues that we are seeing that are affecting how we live, and much more the future that we can have within this country as well. And so being able to bring that up in those structures as well. And so I think, you know, the blessing of having an active counselor, you know, is where it begins, because also the counselor then connects you even at a municipal level to, you know, the department of that deals with environmental issues and how the municipality itself is transitioning in terms of its energy usage, in terms of you know, the governance of the city and how it responds to climate change as well. Very important thing that you bring up there. Thank you, Lorato. So, and then thinking again about the efficiency of climate policy as well. The next question is talking about considering the need to contribute to Yango's COY 18 Global Youth Statement, and how can the principles you co-create align with the global youth narrative on climate action? So thinking about this now is now thinking on a global level. How can we make sure essentially that we are voicing the challenges that we face at a local level on a much more sort of global scale, right? So what is the impact that we want to see our contributions making on a much broader scale? So think about what that can look like. Now we are not talking about just our elections as South Africans. We're thinking about for example, the mobilizing young people across the globe to vote, right, and to align themselves democratically with the right people who will ensure that there's change that is sustainable within the climate action space. So any thoughts around that and how we can contribute on a broader scale?
Hi, everyone. It's Kalila from the Global Shapers Hub. And I think I want to add that and say, I think it's time for young people to actually stand on their foot of accountability. We must have these conversations, but we must be tweeting and we must be posting and reposting and tagging the necessary people that need to actually hear us speak and need to hear our conversations happen in the spaces that they're happening in. Because I think most of the time is that we are alive with the conversations and we are having these conversations in our different groups, but we're not tagging the right people. We're not involving them in the conversations that we're having and the tweets that we are tweeting or everything. And I think that's the most important part is when you're saying you're holding government accountable, yes, you're voting for government that is aware of climate change issues as well as including young people as part of the conversations. But are you tagging them so that they see your movement at a broader scale, so that they're able to follow the young voices to say, okay, now we know that the advocacy is loud and clear and amplified, which is, I think, the reason why we have all of these conversations is to say, this LCOY is not for today, but also tomorrow. Let's continue tagging each other. Let's continue liking. Let's continue sharing, making it, out there that we as young people in South Africa are aware, but we want people to be accountable and respond to the things that we are asking. We are asking them to respond about why are people in the rural areas not privy to having these conversations in their local communities and finding solutions to the problems that they're having. As Nontutusera mentioned, the problem with them not having access to clean water. We're talking about people that have infrastructure problems because of soil degradation. We need to start tagging each other. This platform, as much as I know it was clarified in the beginning that we're speaking about urban, but it's not limited to that because I'm speaking to everybody that's here. You're supposed to take this conversation to your own communities. You're supposed to amplify it so that we're able to say that these spaces that we create for young people are not only spaces where only the elite or the academics or anybody is privy to them. Everybody has the right to share and to keep sharing until the right people are able to account. And we are able to stand and say, as the young people in South Africa, we stood together, we shared, we put it out there so that people are able to speak to us and allow us to be in the rooms in order to be part of the policy decisions that are made around these issues.
Maria, you should be able to go ahead.
Oh, yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Natalia Maria Sikombe. I'm a faculty at African Leadership Academy, attending with some of my students who are trying to run climate initiative here at ALA in conjunction with SACAN. So I guess for me, what I mostly think about and what I've been trying to kind of like I'm trying to find my words on the document in regards to key principles is in agreement with I believe Lerato, who was just speaking. And I might be wrong, sorry, but it was around accountability, but also leveraging or using these technological advancements and social media, because yes, everyone is now very, very digital, and a lot of youth are very digital and interact on maybe social media platforms or through platforms. So I'm just trying to think of ideas of how do we think creatively and innovatively about how we're keeping track of these policies. So after these discussions, or policymakers decide on doing something or taking on something, how are we keeping up to date, and how are we keeping them accountable, holding them accountable on these policies and the work that needs to be done? I mean, that I feel like that also gives youth, because I feel like youth want to share or want to be part of. Youth are actively trying to be part of these spaces and be heard and seen in these spaces, but sometimes having the platforms or finding the platforms or the ways in which to engage and consistently do so is what sort of also like fizzles out the interest, I guess, or the drive that comes from the youth. So I'm just thinking about like ideas around accountability and how that can be a key principle around not only keeping policymakers accountable, but also getting youth more involved as they are also playing a role in the accountability. Because if they feel responsible, I feel like when you feel responsible and you feel like you are part of a process, yeah, it gives you a sense of ownership and more motivation, I guess. Thank you.
Sorry about that, everyone. So I was actually laughing when Olela was speaking because I'm like, after 20 minutes, she's the first person to bring up social media with a platform of young people. So and just kind of, I think, reflecting on the power of social media it has created a lot of movements, right? And has made a lot of us care about things that were not necessarily on our radar, right? And one of the biggest is probably the movement for Black Lives in 2020, and a whole host of other things as well that have come up since then around, the issues with Palestine and Israel, with even the war in Ukraine and all sorts of other things, right? So those that have, for a lot of us, we might not necessarily have had our ear on that pulse of social issues, and so that has become much more important to a lot of us because of social media, and how that has helped us to just kind of open up our minds and our world to the issues overall that a lot of nations are facing, and not just us, right? But also, I think to speak to that as well is just around the power and the importance of empathy, right? Being able to relate with one another, and building essentially community through social media as well. And I think that's the importance of social media as well, is that it has helped us to build community around who's doing what, and learning from one another, learning from the best practices and what others have done that has won them the ability to grow their movements, whatever the issue of importance may have been for them. And so I think maybe to just wrap it up here, I am out of time, right?
You have about 5 minutes, and then Kulikani can close.
Okay. Yeah, maybe it's fine just to wrap it up here. It's just to ask that you please just take time to reflect on the questions that we've put on the document as well. It will still be open even after the session, so you are able to give your inputs after this webinar today. And so we'd love to hear from everybody what your thoughts are, what your responses are to these questions, because we want to ensure that these responses are as inclusive of everybody's interests as possible, so that we can combine all of that and put it together for our statement. And so your voice is important in this, and so this is why you're here, but it's also why we are asking the questions of you, right? And in your context, in your community, in your whatever your struggle is, even as a youth-led organization, and in trying to create movement around the things that you care about, around climate, in your environment or in your community as well. These are very important things for us to be able to reflect on. So please take a moment to come back to this, and hopefully we'll be able to just maybe send out a quick reminder via email to everybody who's in the meeting to just do some final checks and drop in your last little bits of thoughts around this. But thank you to everybody who's just been really active in communicating your thoughts through this as well. And for everyone, I'm seeing a lot of people on the document as well who's dropping in their comments and their thoughts. It's really great to see that as well. And yeah, some really important things that we've been able to discuss here today. And looking forward to, I think, what the statement will look like, representing all of our thoughts. There's a lot of work ahead of us. I think that we, a lot of things that we are sort of fighting, let me say, against, right? So a lot of systemic issues that a lot of us are facing, thinking back to the issues around the intersectionality of a lot of these issues that we are facing. For a lot of us, there's many things in addition to the effects of climate change and that we are facing in addition to that. So there's many things that are standing against us, but I think when we are united in the action, when we are united in the thinking around how to respond better, we definitely can create more impact in the work that we do. So hopefully also this has opened up opportunity and thinking for you on what collaboration can look like. Who can you collaborate with? Who you can reach out to drive your work beyond even just your sort of scope of influence, and to tap into the influences of one another as well. So thank you, everybody. And back to you, Mdiye.
Thank you so much for facilitating that session, Ntutuzela. We got some really great inputs. There's a lot of activity on the Google Doc, and I see that there are also people on the Google Doc. Maybe you guys are shy to add, but please do feel free to add even after this webinar. Yeah, it's been really good to hear your inputs. It's been really good to hear different perspectives. And so I'm going to hand over to Kulikani to give us our closing remarks. So just to briefly introduce him, he is one of the co-hosts of LCOY South Africa 2023 from SACAN. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mulehi and Notutuzelo and everyone. I was trying to open my camera, but it's okay, even if I do not open it. So I think this is wonderful and very much of a success. On behalf of myself and the other colleagues and all the co-hosts, I would like to say thank you and I appreciate everyone who has participated in this webinar, including the representative from Yango. So one of the things that I wanted to do as part of my remarks was to maybe remind everyone or inform everyone that when this sorry, I forgot his name because he's no longer here. The representative from Yango, he talked about the formation of Yango and how it was formally accepted as a youth constituency under UNFCCC. That was in 2011, and that event or that context, it was when South Africa was hosting COP17, and that is when South African youth started to also formalize themselves. And fast forward from that, in 2019, there was also another LCOY that happened, which was not structured like this. And one of the things that I see as indicators of this webinar as a success is because last time when we had an LCOY, it was only one organization, and it was not as consultative as it is right now. So I think we have done a very good job, and congratulations to ourselves in this first phase. So yeah, I mean, I think this LCOY is it is at another level. So yeah, and we are definitely looking forward to the event, to the actual event, and we're looking forward to the event being influential to the other processes that will be happening after it, including the COY 18 and the COP itself. So yeah, thank you, Molehi and Notutuzelo, everyone who's here, and sorry to not mention your names. And thanks to everyone who joined this webinar. All people, so I was observing the numbers here. We started with close to 50 members. It was like 47, 48. And although even if the number has dropped, but yeah, I can still see people here. So yeah, thank you so much, guys, and God bless you. Thanks, Mulehi. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that, Kulakan. Very inspiring thoughts there. And I hope that everybody else feels as positive about our LCOY this year as he does. And I hope that you continue to engage with us. Please, we'll pop again in the chat the link to our social media platforms. Please keep up to date with everything LCOY related. Please also feel free to contact us directly if you have any other thoughts, if you would like to participate in the physical LCOY, if you want to contribute to the program or anything like that. This is very much an open process, and we are open to hearing what everybody has to say. I would just like to thank all of my colleagues for joining me. Thanks for working the graveyard shift. It's not for the faint-hearted. And yeah, I hope everybody has a good evening.